Now, as we saw in the last video, I basically showed you the end of the problem, where we're going to. And at this point, we know everything we need to calculate the weighted average cost of capital, except for the cost of equity capital. Now, here's how you calculate the weighted average cost of equity. Now, in the previous videos, I showed you that the capital budget, what the company's hoping to raise and invest in a project now, is $10 million. And I showed you in the previous video that this company's capital structure, the structure it thinks will minimize the cost of capital, calls for 50% equity. Now, if we take 50% of $10 million, that gives us the total equity we need for this project, which in this case is $5 million. From a previous video, we saw that our earnings available to the shareholders was $3 million. We saw that they paid a dividend payout ratio of 40%. That means they retained 60%, and 60% of $3 million was $1.8 million. So if we need a total of $5 million, and retained earnings only comes up with $1.8 million, how much does common stock financing have to come up with? $3.2 million. Now, for this project, 1.8 out of the $5 million is going to be retained earnings. 3.2 million out of the 5 million will be common stock financing. What percentage does that make up of our total equity needs? Well, 1.8 million over 5 million gives you 0.36, 36%. So for this project, 30% of the equity, not all capital, just equity now, 30% of the equity capital is going to come from retained earnings. 3.2 million divided by 5 million is 0.64 or 64%. Again, for this project, 64% of the equity capital is going to come from common stock financing. We calculated the component cost of capital early on. We know that the component cost of capital for retained earnings is 15.09%, and we've already calculated the cost of capital for common stock. It's 16.10. If you multiply the percentages times the component cost for common stock and for retained earnings, this is retained earnings, this is common stock, we get these products here. And if you sum those, you get 15.7364%. And that is the component cost of capital for equity. And what we're going to use in the next video now, when we find the weighted average cost of capital, we're going to use a component cost of equity capital of 15.74%. And that's our component cost, our weighted average cost of equity. Weighted because equity is made up of what? Both retained earnings and common stock. For this project, 30% of our equity needs come from retained earnings, 64% from common stock. We multiply those weights times the component cost of capital, sum the products, and that's our weighted average cost of equity capital.